Hello. As you recall, last reading was chapter 8 and part 2, and today will be part 3 of chapter 8. As you remember, we were being evacuated, and we were in a like an army barracks, big, huge airplane hangar, and they had set up cots, and we were all just waiting for a plane to come in to take us out. So that's where we left off last time, and I will be reading again from my journal that I kept during that time. When we were finally given the signal to go, we followed Carol out a side door where passengers normally entered upon arrival. Our group was the first ones to board. Billy and I were about the 15th person in line to get on the plane. It was 6 p.m. We had stood there nearly 3 hours. It had really seemed like only 30 or 40 minutes. We noticed as we were boarding that each group of people coming behind us was boarding by nationality, sometimes 2 nationalities together, as we were with the British. As soon as we sat down in our swing-like hammock seats and fastened our seat belts, a couple of soldiers passed out water bottles to every 2 people with cups and pieces of or mini loaves of bread. When we took off, I had another lump in my throat. I could not swallow anything, so I gave mine to the children sitting next to me. It was a very smooth flight, but the noise was so loud you couldn't hear what anyone was saying unless they yelled at you. I think everyone was so tired and relieved that it was all over, no one was talking. Besides that, we were all wondering, where were we going? In 2.5 hours, we landed. It was dark out, but the airport was all lit up, and the sign said, Bangui Airport. We were in Central African Republic. As we got off the plane, we were met by more soldiers that gave us papers to fill out with information on ourselves. And then they served us coffee, orange juice, cookies, and bread. After about 30 or 40 minutes, they took us by nationality into a van about 3 miles to a French army camp. There, they had a dining hall set up, and they fed us again, army packaged meals, fresh fruit, and coffee. And then they took us to this huge army airplane hangar where cots were set up, and we could try to get some rest before going on from there. They had told us an American Army plane was coming to get us, but they didn't know where it would take us. There was no way we could sleep. There were so many children running around and screaming, and then several babies were crying. Once I got our movie camera out and I filmed some of the people and all of the army cots put up, Billy finally went to sleep for a little while, but I never did. We mostly just sit there and tried to make ourselves believe that this was really happening to us. About 3 a.m., a man came over to our group of people, Americans, and told us to casually, one at a time, get up and walk out of the building to a waiting van outside that would take us over to the American Army airplane that had just arrived. He told us to do this because there were several hundred people in that building, and he knew they would all make a mad exit for the door if they knew the plane was here and it was time to go. I was just so thankful that they were allowing the Americans to go first. So one by one, we got up and casually strolled toward the exit door. A lot of people were sleeping, others were talking or busy with their children. No one seemed to notice as about 15 of us walked out. Just as we arrived at the airplane, another group of Americans were arriving. They were all missionaries with the Covenant Church. Most of them were teachers and students from the boarding school that was in Karawa, Zaire, which was just over the border and not far from this airport. They had all driven in to get on this same plane. A lot of these people knew Tom, that was with us. He was a Covenant Church missionary also, and they were all glad to see each other. By the time we all stood in line to fill out more papers and go through immigration, and then got on the airplane and took off, it was 4 a.m. While we had been waiting in line to leave, I cried again because we were leaving Africa, and I didn't know if my children were still safe at Rethi or not. We had only been up in the air a little while when Tom went up to the pilot's cabin and asked him where we were going, because up to the moment we still didn't know. Tom came back to tell us that the pilot was discussing with someone over the radio at that moment as to where to take us. He said that it would be either Germany or Brussels. Then at the same point later on during the flight, word came back to all of us that it had been decided and we would be going to Brussels, Belgium. Now, it doesn't say this in my notes, my journal, but I just wanted to add what happened with our children. We didn't know this until later, but because we were leaving the country, the children were not allowed to stay in the boarding school if their parents weren't somewhere in the country. And so they walked into the classroom where our children were sitting, our daughter, whispered in her ear, "Go to your room and pack a suitcase and go to the airfield." They did the same thing for our son. They didn't tell them why or what was going on. They had no idea. All they knew was that they had to leave. And so they went back to their room and packed a bag, and a small airplane took them to a boarding house where they spent the night with other adults were there, but they were alone as far as family. And then the next morning, they flew them to Nairobi, Kenya. After flying 6.5 hours, we landed at Dakar, Senegal. There was a group of American embassy workers waiting for us to arrive. They fed us a hot meal and asked if there was anything that we needed. They said if someone had a message to send, they would see that it was done. So I asked them to send a message to our missionaries in Nairobi and tell them where we were going, and if they hear anything from our children, please send them to Brussels as soon as possible. We were there in Dakar about 1.5 hours, and then we got back on the same airplane and took off just as another airplane was landing with another load of refugees. Each time we took off in the plane, Billy and I would have to take a motion sickness pill. It made us sleepy, and we would both sleep for about 2 hours, sitting straight, leaning on each other. During these 2 days, about 4 hours sleep was all I had. After flying 6 more hours, we landed in Brussels. It was about 9 p.m. Another group of embassy workers met us. Some even came on the airplane before we got off to welcome us. And just as the plane had landed, we all stood up and gathered around close to each other, and Tom led us in prayer, thanking the Lord for a safe trip. We were all missionaries. There were about 90 of us, with one Peace Corps worker and one American tourist that had been visiting Zaire when this all happened. Neither one of those joined us in prayer. Hotel minivans were waiting just as we stepped off the airplane to take us to an office building of another Army camp. There, we filled out more forms and ate the McDonald's salads and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches they had for us. They had workers there that would help you if you needed to make reservations to fly on to America from there, or if you needed money from your credit card. They also had a stack of used clothing, sweaters, jackets, warm clothes for children, because it was very cold outside, and none of us were dressed for weather like that. But by the time Billy and I got to them, they were all picked over. Nothing was really suitable or was left for us. In another room, several telephones were set up, and you could place a collect call to the United States. So Billy and I went straight there and called Springfield, Missouri, first because we knew that they could try to reach our missionaries in Nairobi and get information on to the children. Then I called my mother, and I told her where we were and that we were okay. By the time they took us over to our hotel, where they had already booked all the missionaries, it was nearly midnight. Before going to sleep, I took a wonderful shower, and then we talked to Bill's parents. And during the night, sometime, we got a call from Billy Burr. Billy was our area director at that time. He told us our children were to be evacuated also, and was being evacuated to Nairobi, and would be calling us as soon as they arrived there. At that time, we told Billy that we did not want to go home. We wanted to stay and work in Africa or somewhere close so that we would be able to get back into Zaire as soon as possible. The next day, the hotel van took us downtown, and Tom had lived in Brussels for a while at one time, so he took us around, and we tried to find a secondhand shop to buy us some sweaters. A missionary stationed there in Brussels from the Covenant Church had brought me a sweater that morning, but Billy needed something because it was cold and misting rain. When we arrived downtown and got out of the van, we went straight to a McDonald's and got a hamburger and a Coke. It was delicious. We never found the secondhand store, but we did find a candy store and bought some candy. As we walked back in the door of the hotel room, Linda McLaughlin called, and we got to talk to the children. I'll never forget, one of the first things they said was that they did not want to go back to the States. They wanted to stay in Africa. More than anything else, they wanted to go back to Rethi, their boarding school. When they had left Rethi, everyone else was still there because it was so calm in that area, they didn't see any reason to evacuate the others. But since Billy and I had been evacuated out of the country, so they had to be also. It was so good to talk to them and know that they were both doing okay. It felt so good to know that both children felt the same as we did about staying in Africa. I told Linda to book them on the next flight to Brussels. That night, we talked to Billy Burr again, and he said to think about 3 different places that they could send us. One was Cameroon, the other was Brazzaville, Congo, and the third was to Nairobi. Then even a little later on that night, after we had gone to sleep, he called back and mentioned going to Lomé, Togo. He had been on the phone earlier with Don Corbin. He's over all African missionaries. So we don't know whose idea Lomé was. He also said that if it was okay with us, he would call Linda and tell her to just keep the children there in Nairobi, no matter where we decided to go, because we would need to go to Nairobi first to buy a few things we would be needing. So it was decided the children would stay there, and Billy and I would come to them as soon as possible. The next morning, we were able to get in contact with some of the other Assembly of God missionaries there in Brussels. Brother and Sister Love, the assistant pastors of the International Church, had come by and brought us 2 bags of clothes to look through and also took us out to lunch. And then later that day, I talked to Ruth Collins from the Assembly of God Bible College, and she said that we could come by the next day. She would come by the next day and get us and take us to the college, and we could stay there. Because they were changing our weekend hotel rates from $100 a night to $200 a night. At the college, there would be an apartment available, a missionary home on furlough, for us to rent for just $13 a night, and we could eat our meals in the school cafeteria. When she came to get us, Billy had went downtown to see about getting tickets to go to Nairobi. I had already checked out of the hotel, so we waited over an hour in the hotel lobby for Billy to come back. We did stay at the apartment until we left that Friday. Everyone at the college was so nice to us. The girls gave me lotion and soap and shampoo, Kleenexes, deodorant. One girl even bought me a pair of pants and some tennis shoes. Ruth took us shopping, but we didn't buy much because everything was so expensive. One married couple came and brought me some really nice clothes, and Billy a leather short jacket. When we left Friday morning to go to Nairobi, I had taken a really bad cold and a cough. Because of the change of weather for me, and because I was caught out in the rain several times, I felt so bad and I could hardly wait to get on the plane and just go to sleep. They had mixed our seating arrangement with someone else, and Billy and I got put in business class. We were upstairs, top deck, in a cabin that only seated about 30 people. After we had eaten a delicious meal, I did go to sleep, and I never even knew when the movie came on or when it went off. I had been given an all-weather coat from a lady there in Brussels, and so I was cold, and I kept it on during the flight. The flight attendant tried to take it several times to hang it up, but I told him that I was cold. Several hours later, when I woke up, I was hot. I found out later he had turned the warm air on in the cabin just for me. It was only about a 6-hour flight, so before I knew it, we were landing. Inside the airport, we stood in a long line at immigration, and when we got to the front, we found out we had been standing in the wrong line. By the time we got through and got out into the area to pick up our luggage, we had already been there about 45 minutes. I saw the children before Billy did. They were on the other side from where our luggage came in, and I could not get to them until our luggage came and we were cleared through customs, but it was so good to see them. I waved, smiled, and cried all at the same time. Several pieces of luggage had been given to us, and they were all full of warm clothes, which I didn't need here in Kenya because we were back in hot Africa. The children had bought me a big bouquet of roses, and they were so pretty. I just loved being near the children, and I could not stop hugging them. We had lots to talk about, and all of us tried talking at once. From Linda, we learned they had been having some political problems in Nairobi and was expecting more this weekend. So the missionaries there had been warned to stay in their houses all day Saturday. I couldn't believe it. It seemed Africa was having problems all over. We had even heard just this week that Lome was having problems and that 7 people had been killed there. Needless to say, I was worried about going there and how to tell the children that that was where we were going. Linda took us to town and we exchanged some money for shillings, and then she picked me up some antibiotics and cough syrup because my cough was so bad. Since we had to stay in Saturday, I really did stay in. I slept all day long. I couldn't seem to wake up. I just felt exhausted from everything that I had been through. And now that I was with Jenny and Jason, I wasn't even afraid or worried about anything. I felt so safe. I wasn't afraid that anything would happen. It just felt good to be alive and with my family.